بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين وعلى أصحابه الميامين وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحان الله، نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستجيره ونستنصره، فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. وندعو ونقول: نسألك يا رب أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. لا إله إلا أنت، منك وإليك يا الله. It is not an exaggeration to say that the biggest challenge that confronts us collectively as Muslims can be summed up in a challenge summed up in the statement that it is a challenge of the formation of Muslim consciousness. Week after week, day in and day out, what we are actually struggling for is the shape and the content and the nature of Muslim consciousness. As much as we believe in Islam as an objective truth in our hearts and in our intellects, what we do with this objective truth that we believe in is between us and Allah. But what we are materially charged with and duty bound to perform is other than our convictional state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other than purifying and strengthening and solidifying that convictional state, is to look beyond ourselves and to contribute affirmatively and effectively to the shaping of Muslim consciousness. The world is complex. Causality is often imperceptible. The sum total of decisions that influence causation in life are often beyond our ability to monitor or to calculate, and quite often even to understand. But what molds the world we live in is billions and billions of imperceptible, even sometimes subconscious acts that take place every instant, every moment in existence by numerous individuals around the world. Consciousness shapes decisions. Consciousness affects acts. And acts shape the reality of the world we live in. Consciousness is what decides what you perceive to be normal and acceptable in life. Consciousness is what decides what offends you, what makes you take exception. Consciousness affects what you see to be, what you consider to be consistent with your sense of dignity or your sense of honor. Consciousness decides what embarrasses you or what affirms you or what validates you. But beyond that, it is consciousness that will influence your choice of friends, the decision whether to study or not to study, the decision whether to work hard or not work hard. Consciousness affects the decision of how you invest money, even when you don't notice how you invest money, what you spend money on. It affects your choice of words. It affects your choice of clothes. It affects your choice of everything. So we struggle to shape, affect, and shape and influence Muslim consciousness. As simple and straightforward as this is, it underscores how heavy the responsibility. Because in the struggle for the formation of consciousness, those who are aware that this indeed is what the struggle is about are then obligated to rise to the occasion of Allah's charge when Allah in Surah Al reminds Muslims that the reason they are Muslim, the reason that they are Muslim, the reason that they stand to inherit the legacy of the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, and the legacy of all the prophets that Surah Al reminds us that from a Muslim perspective, they are all prophets of God, and we don't differentiate between them, and we don't discriminate between them. The reason that you inherit the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, is Allah puts it, is that you are supposed to be an exemplar unto others. When Allah says, Kuntum khayra ummah, you are the best of nations, or you are the best of nations, Allah is not affirming an empirical fact. Allah is affirming an aspirational statement. In other words, you ought to be the best of nations. Ought to be. And ought to be the best in what sense? The richest, the most powerful, the most bombastic, the funniest? Obviously not. The best as a moral exemplar. And it's because of this position of being a moral exemplar where you can then start thinking about the obligation of testifying and witnessing for God. Muslim consciousness. What fills the head, I won't even say of the average Muslim, but every Muslim on the face of this planet, what is in their head? What shapes their nervous system? What constitutes what is acceptable from what is objectionable? How do they relate to the world around them? This is the struggle. And this is why whenever you stand on a podium and you choose to open your mouth and you choose to speak in an event marked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran of Yawm al-Jum'ah, that Friday where we get together to remember Allah, but not remember Allah just in simple silent prayer, but remember Allah in the form of a nasiha. A nasiha, a word of counsel. If the word of counsel is not designed to shape consciousness, then what value is it? What use is this nasiha? You pause for a second. And let's see what this week yields. I'll start out from an unusual point. An American guy who is ethnically Uyghur from East Turkmenistan, or East Turkestan, the so-called Xinjiang province in China, goes to Mecca and he wears a t-shirt saying, "Pray for the Uyghurs, stop the genocide in China." He is promptly arrested by Saudi forces. This fellow, however, is lucky. Not just because he is a US citizen, but because his son is active in American politics and has connections in the legislature, and through his connections in the legislature, through his contacts in the legislature, I believe it was the Senate, calls are placed to the State Department, and the State Department contacts Saudi government, and that Uyghur Muslim is released after being arrested. But what the story leaves out is while this individual manages to be released because he's a US citizen and because he has a son who has some influence in the US, there are another 22 Uyghur Muslims who remain languishing in Saudi prisons, who have no connections, have no contacts, don't have the right citizenship, and their only crime is that they called attention to the genocide committed against Muslims in China. How important is this event? How do you relate to this event? How does it influence your decisions in life? How does it shape your attitudes, your behaviors, your decision? Well, it depends on your consciousness. You see, if you have a certain type of consciousness, it might deeply offend you, thoroughly offend you, that someone going to visit the holy sites, the sacred space of the Prophet ﷺ, the place that is the haram, the sanctuary, that is supposed to be the sanctuary for Muslims, that in a place like this, the consciousness being affirmed for Muslims is that they should mind their own business, is that they should see fellow Muslims being thrown in concentration camps, being persecuted, being harvested for organs, being raped, being forcibly prevented from practicing Islam, and in the heart of the sanctuary of the Prophet ﷺ, you are not allowed to say a word. It is your consciousness. With a certain type of consciousness, you might be so outraged that you say, as a matter of principle, the holy sites are in the wrong hands and under the wrong control. And as a matter of principle, I cannot rest in my life until our holy sites are in more trusty hands and more moral hands and ethical hands. But if you have a different consciousness, you look at the story, maybe you'll shake your head and just go on unimpeded, unobstructed, unbothered. This individual was freed not because of his dignity as a Muslim, not because of anything related to Islam, but because of connections with a superpower that the caretakers of the holy sites seem not to care about anything in the world except what this superpower thinks of them. This person was released because of his connections and his American citizenship, while other Uyghurs have been arrested and handed over to the Chinese government by the Saudi government. And other Uyghurs continue to languish in prison with no hope of ever being released, without charges, without trial, and even if there was a trial, we know we couldn't trust it. Because apparently, just asking Muslims to pray for their fellow Muslims in China is something that warrants, in the holy land of the Prophet, that warrants your life being destroyed forever. Everything in our world is interconnected and interrelated. Our morality vis-a-vis the holy sanctuary and who is in control of the holy sanctuary is reflective and in fact is defining as to our morality vis-a-vis everything else. Human beings are either frivolous, dumb, ignorant, unintelligent, cowardly, or not. You see, this event seamlessly connects to another reality in our Muslim life. The type of Islam that comes from those that control the holy sites is an Islam that celebrates apathy, that celebrates cowardliness, that celebrates frivolity. If you want to sing and dance in a rock concert organized by the Crown Prince, you are celebrated and honored. If you want to attend a rock concert by Minaj or whatever, or whatever other rapper or rock star or whatever, you're fine. You're a good Muslim. But if you want to wear a t-shirt bringing attention to the plight of your fellow Muslims, you're a problematic Muslim. You're a problem. I've talked about this and I will die talking about this. All of us aware that once upon a time, Muslims in Arab countries dreamt of freedom. And what that freedom meant was something that is taken granted all over the world. What that freedom meant is simply the right to choose who rules you, to change through the ballot box who rules you, and to hold officials accountable. something that is taken for granted all over the world. But because this is the heartland of the Muslim world, because this is the Middle East, the entire world conspired to destroy the dreams of freedom in Syria, in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Bahrain. The most recent incident is in Sudan. The Sudanese, after many sacrifices, hundreds, if not thousands, killed and imprisoned and tortured, overthrow a corrupt military ruler, al-Bashir. They dream of something that is taken for granted all over the world. They dream of choosing their own government and holding those who rule over them accountable. After massive demonstrations and a long struggle, they managed to strike an agreement with the military. The military will share power with a number of civilians, but the military will be in control for a period of time before handing over power to civilians. The military all around the Muslim world is a well-known instrument of oppression and despotism. The military all around the Muslim world is the most corrupt, the most uneducated, the most morally decrepit, and invariably those who hold power and decide the fate of Muslims everywhere. So what happens in Sudan? What happens in Sudan is the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia send a very clear message to the military. Quash the dreams of democracy. Destroy the civilian movement, and we will enrich you. What Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Israel did in Egypt, they sought to do in Sudan. Tunisia was another case in point. The revolution in Tunisia results in a civilian government and free elections and a nascent democracy. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt keep the pressure on Tunisia until the military stages a coup with a symbolic civilian at the helm. And the dreams of democracy come to an end in Tunisia. But Sudan, we have another element. Right before Trump left power, the Trump administration that doesn't think of Sudan as human beings and as an actual nation with dreams and aspirations. The Trump administration thinks of Sudan as a trophy for Israel. So the Trump administration tells Sudan, you want off the list of the countries supporting terror. You want an end to American sanctions? Yes, we do. Okay, make peace with Israel. If you warm up to Israel, suddenly you change category from being supporters of terrorism to being kosher. And the Sudanese government obliged because they need American aid and they need to have an end to American sanctions. But here, it even gets worse. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and now Israel chimes in. Before the military stages a coup in Sudan, a not-so-secret Sudanese delegation 3 weeks before the coup visits Israel. And immediately after a coup, a secret delegation from the Mossad visits Sudan. This was reported in Haaretz, the Israeli paper. Not even in Arab media or Islamic media. Haaretz freely admits that Israel wants to make peace with a corrupt authoritarian military because Israel wants the military to give it an intelligence base on the Red Sea. And they know that if there is a democratic government in Sudan, then they will have to deal with Sudanese as human beings that have opinions and have debates and have discussions. You see, we would rather have a corrupt army officer in charge who we can bribe. We can give them money so they can have a home in Switzerland and a home in France and give us our intelligence bases on the Red Sea and do everything undercover. But dealing with elected governments that has vetting, that has oversight, that has debates, you see, everything is interconnected. Yet you had Muslims who till today will say the Trump administration wasn't that bad. Trump wasn't really an Islamophobe. This is the administration that moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. This is the administration that forcibly made Morocco normalize relations with Israel, and Sudan normalized relations with Israel. This is the administration that treats Muslims from a thoroughly racist paradigm. You only matter to the extent that those we care about benefit from you. And yet you have Muslims that say, what's the problem? Trump is not really an Islamophobe, he's just a politician. Why is it that Muslims, that people around the world have the natural expectation to have an opinion, to express an opinion, to care about something, to work to serve the cause they care about, except when it comes to Muslims. You see, there are Muslims not only who don't care about Trump and his anti-Muslim rhetoric, not only don't care about the crushing of freedom in Sudan and Tunisia and Libya and Yemen and Bahrain and Egypt, but their consciousness is so deformed that they will go visit Mecca. And where will they stay in Mecca? They will stay in the Hilton. After the Hilton built hotels on land that used to have mosques that the Chinese government destroyed. And although there are some organizations that called upon Muslims to boycott the Hilton, the boycott has been largely ineffective. Why? Because of Muslim consciousness. If Muslim consciousness is so decrepit that not even the Hilton in Mecca is affected, then how are you the best of nations? In what way do you bear witness? You don't even have the freedom to bear witness, because your mullahs and your imams have taught you that somehow we can bear witness without freedom. Somehow, although Allah obligates you to bear witness, somehow they've taught you that you don't need to worry your little head about it. We, the authoritarian rulers of Islam, will bear witness for you. We will tell you what to believe, and we will tell you as to what you should testify and how to testify. This is in the religion that established the principle of personal accountability before all else. Consciousness. When the Hilton sees there are no consequences, when the world sees that every place where Muslims dreamt of freedom, it was crushed with no consequences. When the world learns that this entire Middle East region, the only place that matters in this entire region is Israel, and the rest are just fillings, gap fillers, fodder. And then you look around and you find Muslim institutions even in the United States and Europe, filling the minds of Muslims with what? With talk about how we should have freedom in Mecca, with how oppression has sullied the sanctity of the Prophet's sacred space, ﷺ, with how the Sudanese have a right to aspire for freedom, the Egyptians, the Tunisians. No, none of that. It fills these institutions, the same Muslim institutions that have banned someone like me the Islamic Center of Southern California. I will continue to name them and shame them till the day I leave this earth. And Zaytuna, and the like. Fill your head with what? You see, everything is interconnected. An event that I just became aware of right before the khutbah speaks volumes and volumes. The European Council has a division that is supposed to worry about human rights standards in Europe. That division in Strasbourg, concerned about the rise of Islamophobia all over Europe and the sharp increase last year, yet again, in attacks against Muslims and mosques. The steep rise in anti-Muslim attacks, that Strasbourg headquarters launched a campaign, and the advertisement for the campaign says, "Beauty is in diversity, as freedom is in hijab. How boring would be the world if everyone would look the same. Celebrate diversity and respect hijab." That's all the campaign says. Respect hijab. Who has a conniption? France, the same country whose government displayed the pornographic cartoons insulting the Prophet ﷺ. France, through its spokesman, a woman by the name Surah Al Imran, a minister of state for youth and engagement, a woman with an Arab-sounding name. Typical colonialism. You bring a Muslim informant, a Muslim traitor, a Muslim sellout, and put them in a position to spew hate against their own kind. What does she do? France objects to the campaign, anti-Muslim hate campaign, the anti-Islamophobia campaign, the respect the hijab campaign, and they describe it as shocking. Why? Because hijab is not a symbol of freedom, but of submission. And according to another right-wing French politician, Islam is the enemy of freedom. This campaign is the enemy of truth. France objects. The European Convention for Human Rights, or European Convention on Human Rights, have 47 members. 47 states belong to that council. But because France objected to the anti-Islamophobic campaign, the campaign was immediately frozen. immediately suspended. Although France has the largest Muslim minority, although France also experienced the largest jump in anti-Muslim attacks and attacks on places of worship, although France just last week announced that it's going to close down another 7 mosques, 47 nations in Europe couldn't tell France, where is all your preaching about freedom of speech and human rights? Because a campaign called for respect hijab, you announce that this campaign is anti-French and must immediately stop, and indeed it is stopped. All the tweets, all the material were deleted. Everything is interconnected. Why? Because France insulted the Prophet, and when Muslims tried to organize a campaign to boycott French products, those Muslims were arrested in Saudi. Those Muslims were arrested in the Emirat. Because your leaders in Zaytuna, in the Islamic Center of Southern California, didn't tell you this is a cause. You must immediately boycott, translate your consciousness into your purchase power. Boycott made in France products. You see, if there was a reaction by Muslim, the way that there is a reaction by Jews when someone is being anti-Semitic, the French economy would have suffered so enormously that they would have learned the lesson. Instead, when they insulted the Prophet, not only did Saudi Arabia oppose the boycott of France, but the president of Egypt flew to France to assure the French Prime Minister of Egypt's support. And there are plenty of Muslim Egyptians who continue to support Sisi. They even invented a myth that's not in the record, that he flew to France to demand an apology, although Sisi never mentioned an apology, and no apology was given. Consciousness. How many Muslims, how many Muslim institutions, how many Muslim podiums, how many members speak about what matters? Where are the principles of freedom of speech? Where are the principles of human rights? France says that this campaign, Respect Hijab, supports the Taliban in Afghanistan and ignores the plight of women in Afghanistan. France, during the entire time Western powers had occupied Afghanistan, the numerous human rights violations committed in Afghanistan, France didn't object once. The numerous sexual assaults committed by coalition forces against Afghani women, France didn't object once. When the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court wanted to launch an investigation in war crimes committed against Afghanis by Western powers, headed by the United States. The Trump administration threatened to bar the prosecutor and the members of the International Criminal Court from entering the United States, to freeze their assets, and even to arrest them and charge them criminally. This is the Trump administration. Did a single Muslim voice talk about this? No. Did the wolves who teach in Zaytuna say, how dare Trump threaten to arrest and prosecute people who wanted to investigate war crimes under the Geneva Conventions? No. No. Because you Muslims are expected to be dumb, stupid, and ignorant. And that's how they like to keep you. Because the Trump administration threatened the International Court, Criminal Court, the pre-trial chamber in the International Criminal Court dropped the investigation, ordered the prosecutor not to investigate further. And it was dropped. France never objected to the war crimes committed in Afghanistan. France committed and continues to commit sexual assaults, human trafficking violations, torture and abduction through its peacekeeping forces in Africa, in Mali, in Somalia, in Mauritania. They never talk about that. But there's an anti-Islamophobia campaign. They take a firm stand. And why? Because they know Muslims don't matter. Because they know that your consciousness is empty. Because they know that you celebrate the likes of Hamza Yusuf and the likes of the Islamic Center of Southern California. That's what's in your brain, and so you are zeros. That's why. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Yes, consciousness. Consciousness. Another story. Human Rights Watch, along with a number of human rights organizations, have meticulously documented the fact that after the Taliban took control, foreign aid offered to Afghanistan by the US and by other Western countries and by Saudi Arabia and by the Emirates was all frozen. A lot of humanitarian aid organizations evacuated the country. As a result, many displaced Afghanis starved. And in order to eat, case after case, documented by Human Rights Watch, of Afghani families selling their young girls to rich older men who buy them. A 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old. They sell them to men who now have ranged from 50 to 70 years old. Well, everyone knows what will happen to these girls. They will be raped. They will be forced into sexual slavery and labor. They will be used and abused as human beings, and they will probably die early. Many of these girls, because they're already malnourished, have unusually small bodies. Even those who are 9 and 11 and 12 have not developed like normal 9 or 11 or 12-year-olds because of malnourishment. And yet, their families, in order to settle debts, or in order to borrow money, or in order to earn money, sell these little girls off to men. And these men make it clear: no visitations, no continued contacts. I'm going to take your daughter, say goodbye to her, and farewell. Whose problem is that? Whose problem is that? When you have Muslim countries that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on soccer teams, and hundreds of millions of dollars on yachts, and hundreds of millions of dollars on paintings, and hundreds of millions of dollars on weapons, a single missile fired in Yemen that kills a whole load of civilians could feed one of these families for 5 years, if not more. What occupies your mind? What circulates in there? What runs around in your intellect? What do you think about? When you look at the money you make, you review your accounts, you pay your taxes. What are your thoughts? When you decide to sit there and listen to a lecture by Hamza Yusuf, or go to the Islamic Center of Southern California to listen to what they have to say, what occupies the space inside that intellect? Do you think of these girls? Do you lose sleep over these girls? Do you sit supplicating to Allah and find yourself crying because you can imagine the rape that these girls will go through as little children? Do you have a sense of responsibility? Are you an angry Muslim? Or are you an immoral, apathetic, disgusting Muslim? What are you? Because you answered this question. What are you? Answers another question. answers, what are we? Your answer to that question, what are you, determines the answer to what are we. Think about it. Think about it before it's too late. And you stand before Allah, and there will be no excuses. And there will be, no, but I enjoyed listening to this guy or that guy. No, but I thought Trump is not really an Islamophobe, he's just a politician. Think about it before the truth confronts you right in the face. The truth that you innately and intuitively know to be real, pure, and honest. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم اعف عنا اللهم ارحمنا اللهم تب علينا يا تواب واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا علي عظيم. Ya Rab, forgive our sins, guide us to the straight path, empower us to be better Muslims, Ya Allah, Ya Rab. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وأقم الصلاة.